My brother's kid spat on my birthday cake and yelled, "You don't deserve it anyway." I stayed silent while everyone laughed. That night, my sister messaged me, "You're too sensitive. Maybe don't come around anymore." The next morning, I transferred every bill and loan back into their names. By the end of the day, my phone was exploding with missed calls. I, 32M, let my family learn the hard way what too sensitive really costs. The spit landed dead center on the buttercream roses. A thick glob that sat there for a beat before slowly sliding down the side of my birthday cake, leaving a wet trail through the frosting I'd spent 2 hours perfecting that morning. My nephew stood there with his arms crossed, chin jutted out in that way kids do when they think they've won something. He couldn't have been more than 9, but the smugness on his face belonged to someone much older, someone who'd learned it from watching the adults around him. "You don't deserve it anyway." The words hung in the air of my small apartment, where I'd been stupid enough to host my own birthday dinner. Around me, my family, my brother, my sister, my parents, erupted into laughter. Not the uncomfortable kind that comes from shock. The genuine kind. The kind that said they thought this was funny. That I was the punchline, not the victim. I stood there, holding the knife I'd been about to use to cut the cake, watching that spit trail reach the bottom tier, and I said nothing. My hand didn't shake. My face didn't change. I just set the knife down on the counter, turned off the oven where the lasagna was warming, and excused myself to the bathroom. Behind the locked door, I stared at myself in the mirror. 32 years old, systems analyst, 6 figures, the family fixer, the one who always helped. The one who always paid. The one who apparently didn't deserve a clean birthday cake. I heard them still laughing in the living room. Heard my brother making some joke about kids being kids. Heard my mother's voice rise above the rest, saying something about how I'd always been so serious, so uptight about everything. She sounded almost proud of the kid. I washed my hands, dried them, went back out with a smile that didn't reach anywhere near my eyes. The rest of the evening crawled by like an animal dying slowly. I served the lasagna. I listened to my father complain about his mortgage payment coming up. I nodded, while my sister talked about her husband's failed business venture, and how tight money had been. I watched my brother feed his kids, including Miss Spitter, from the meal I'd cooked, in the home I'd paid for, surrounded by furniture I'd helped them all buy over the years. My nephew didn't apologize. Nobody asked him to. My brother just ruffled his hair and told me we were still on for helping him move next weekend, right? My sister reminded me about her car payment that was due. My mother kissed my cheek and told me not to be so sensitive about childish pranks. I closed the door behind them at 11:30. The ruined cake sat on the counter, that spit trail now dried and crusty. I picked up the entire thing, walked it to the trash chute, and dumped it. Heard it hit the bottom with a satisfying crash. Then I poured myself a drink and opened my laptop. My phone buzzed around 12:30, a message from my sister. She wanted to talk about what happened tonight, about how I'd been cold and distant after the cake incident, about how everyone had noticed my mood shift, about how it was just a kid being a kid, and I needed to learn to take a joke. If I was going to be this sensitive, and make everyone walk on eggshells, I shouldn't come around anymore. Too sensitive. I read those words 3 times, took another sip of my whiskey, and I started typing. I didn't respond to her message. Instead, I opened my banking portal. See, here's what my family had conveniently forgotten over the years, or maybe just never thought about because I'd made it all so easy. I wasn't just the family fixer. I was the family foundation, the structure holding up every single one of their lives. My father's mortgage, in my name, co-signed it 4 years ago when his credit tanked after a string of bad decisions. The monthly payments came out of my account automatically. He'd never made a single payment himself. My sister's car, in my name. Loan in my name. Insurance in my name. She totaled her last 2 vehicles and couldn't get approved anywhere, so I bought it outright and put her as the primary driver. She gave me $200 a month when she remembered, which worked out to about 4 times a year. My brother's credit cards, 3 of them, all authorized users on my accounts. He'd maxed them out twice. I paid them off twice. The current balance sat at just under $18,000. His kid's private school tuition came out of one of those cards. The same kid who'd spit on my cake. My mother's medical bills? On a payment plan I'd set up and automated. She had insurance, but the co-pays and medications added up. I'd been covering the difference for 6 years. The family cell phone plan. Mine. The streaming services everyone used. Mine. The storage unit where my brother kept his failed business inventory. Mine. The security deposit and first month's rent on my sister's apartment when she'd left her ex. Mine. Never paid back. I'd consolidated it all years ago to make it easier, to help. Because that's what family did, right? You helped, you supported, You sacrificed. You stayed silent when they laughed at you, because making a scene would just prove you were the uptight one, the sensitive one, the problem. I pulled up every account, every payment, every bill, made a spreadsheet. The numbers were worse than I'd thought. Over the past 5 years I'd put in just north of $200,000 into keeping my family afloat. Some of it loans they promised to pay back, most of it just expected, assumed. My job, apparently. The work took me until 3 in the morning. Transferring everything back into their names wasn't simple. Some things required phone calls that would have to wait until business hours. But I could start the process. I could revoke authorized user access. I could stop automatic payments. I could send the transfer requests. I started with my sister since she'd been kind enough to tell me to stay away. Removed her as an authorized user on all 3 cards. Initiated a balance transfer for her portion of the charges. Roughly $6,000 in furniture and clothes and weekend trips she'd charged over the past year. Sent her the documentation. Cancelled the car insurance. Submitted the title transfer paperwork to the DMV. Sent her the loan information with the bank's contact number. Downloaded every receipt and statement, and compiled it into a PDF. Attached it to an email with the subject line, Family Obligations, Detailed Accounting. Then my brother. His was more complicated because of the private school tuition. I called the school's emergency line, explained I was no longer able to cover the costs, and needed to remove my payment method immediately. They were surprisingly accommodating once I explained the situation. They'd bill his account starting Monday. I revoked his authorized user access, sent in his balance transfer paperwork, added up every time I'd spotted him cash, every utility bill I'd covered when he was short, every expense for his kids that somehow became my responsibility. The spreadsheet came to $43,000 over 5 years. I attached it to his email. My father's mortgage was trickier. I couldn't just remove myself as a co-signer, but I could stop making payments. I called the bank's automated system and canceled the autopay. Set up alerts to his phone and email for when the payment came due. Downloaded the original co-signer agreement where he promised to refinance me off within 2 years. That had been 4 years ago. I attached it to his email. My mother's medical bills were the only thing I hesitated on. She hadn't laughed the loudest. She hadn't spit on my cake. But she'd stood there. She'd called me sensitive. She'd never once thanked me for the hundreds of hours I'd spent on hold with insurance companies, fighting claims, setting up payment plans, driving her to appointments. I didn't cancel her payments, but I did send her an itemized list of every expense I'd covered and a new payment plan, one she'd be making herself going forward. By the time the sun came up, I'd sent 4 emails, canceled or transferred 13 accounts, revoked access to 6 credit cards, stopped 7 automatic payments, and I felt nothing. No guilt, no satisfaction, just tired. I slept until noon. When I woke up, my phone was on fire, 63 missed calls, 47 text messages, 2 voicemails that had maxed out the recording time, an email from my brother with the subject line, "What the fuck?" I made coffee, sat on my balcony, watched the city move below me, and I listened to the voicemails. My sister's voice came through first, shaking with rage. She called me every name I'd ever heard and a few I hadn't. The car insurance had been canceled. She'd gotten pulled over that morning for a broken taillight and discovered she had no coverage. The cop had impounded the car. She needed me to call her back immediately. This was insane. This was illegal. She was going to sue me. How could I do this to her? Over a stupid cake? My brother's voicemail was shorter but louder. The school had called. They needed payment information by Monday, or his kids couldn't attend. His credit cards weren't working. His wife was hysterical. I needed to fix this right now. He didn't care what joke had offended me, or what stick had gotten lodged up my ass. That this was affecting his children. His innocent children. I was punishing kids over nothing. I deleted both voicemails without listening to them completely. Made a second cup of coffee. Started going through the texts. My father's messages started reasonable. Asked me to call him. Said we needed to talk about the mortgage situation. That they devolved quickly. By message 7, he was telling me I was destroying the family. By message 12, he was calling me selfish and spoiled. By message 18, he was threatening to show up at my apartment. My mother had sent one text. "Please call me. We can fix this, only her." Told her I'd made arrangements for her medical bills to continue for the next 3 months while she set up her own payment plan. Told her I paid enough. Told her I loved her, but I was done being the family bank. Then I turned my phone off. I spent the rest of Sunday deep cleaning my apartment. Threw out all the leftovers from the party. Scrubbed the kitchen until it gleamed. Changed my sheets. Did laundry. Normal things. Things that had nothing to do with the nuclear bomb I just dropped on my family's finances. Monday morning, I turned my phone back on before work. The missed calls had exceeded 100. There were emails now too. My brother had copied our entire extended family on a message explaining what I'd done, how I was holding his children's education hostage, how I'd always been the golden child who thought money made me better than everyone else. My sister had posted something vague on social media about fake people and family betrayal. 12 of our cousins had liked it. My father had left another voicemail. The mortgage payment had bounced. The bank was charging him a late fee. He was going to lose his house because of me. Because I couldn't take a joke. Because I was punishing everyone for a child's innocent mistake. I sat in my car in the parking garage at work, and I started laughing. Not the polite kind, the kind that hurts your chest, the kind that might be crying if you looked at it from a different angle. My nephew was 9 years old enough to know you don't spit out someone's food, old enough to understand disrespect, but apparently not old enough to be held accountable, because that would require the adults around him to parent, instead of laugh. But I was old enough to be held accountable. 32 was old enough to be the family ATM, old enough to swallow disrespect with a smile, old enough to be too sensitive when I finally stopped accepting it. I composed a group email, sent it to all of them, kept it short. I explained that I'd spent 5 years and $200,000 supporting a family that couldn't be bothered to show me basic respect on my birthday. I attached the spreadsheets, every payment, every loan, every expense, all documented, all timestamped, all provable. I explained that I'd been called too sensitive for being upset about being disrespected in my own home, that I'd been told not to come around anymore. So I was making that easier for everyone by removing myself as a financial presence as well. I explained that all the loans I'd paid off for them, still legally owed. I had the documentation, the signed agreements, the promises to pay me back. I wasn't demanding repayment, but I wasn't pretending the debt didn't exist anymore either. I explained that I'd continue to be available for family emergencies, real emergencies, not manufactured crises or poor planning. But I was done being the solution to problems they'd created for themselves, and I explained that until I received genuine apologies, not sorry you were offended, or sorry you're so sensitive, but real acknowledgement of what had happened and how I'd been treated, I wouldn't be attending any family functions. I sent it at 8:45 Monday morning. Then I turned my phone off again and went into work. My boss noticed I was in a good mood. I'd been carrying the weight of my family's dysfunction for so long that removing it felt like I'd taken off a weighted vest I'd forgotten I was wearing. I was lighter, clearer. I laughed at jokes during the team meeting. I volunteered to lead the new project. I stayed late because I wanted to, not because I was dreading going home to more calls and more guilt. When I finally turned my phone back on that night, the messages had changed tone. My mother had sent 3 texts asking me to please reconsider, saying she understood I was hurt, that this was too much, that I was tearing the family apart. But she didn't raise me to be cruel. My sister had sent a novel. Started with anger, cycled through bargaining, landed on begging. Her car was still impounded. She couldn't get to work. She was going to lose her job. She had kids to feed. Wait, no, that was a lie. She didn't have kids. She deleted that and said she had bills to pay, responsibilities. She couldn't do this on her own. She needed my help. She was sorry if I felt disrespected. She was sorry I took it the wrong way. She was sorry I was so upset. Could I please just fix the car situation and we could talk about everything else later? My brother's message was shorter. He wanted to meet in person. He wanted to explain. He wanted me to understand his perspective. The school had called again. They needed payment by Wednesday or his kids were out. His wife was threatening to leave him. This was destroying his marriage. Was I happy now? My father hadn't sent anything new. But my mother's messages made it clear he was at her house, and they'd been discussing strategy. She wanted me to come over for dinner Friday, just family. We could talk it all through, calmly, like adults. I responded only to my mother again, told her I'd come to dinner Friday on one condition. My nephew apologized to me directly for his behavior, and the adults who'd laughed took responsibility for enabling it. Otherwise there was nothing to discuss. The typing indicator appeared and disappeared 6 times. Then, I'll talk to your brother. Tuesday brought my brother's wife into the mix. She called me from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. She didn't yell. That was almost worse. She just explained very calmly, very carefully, that I was hurting children, that whatever issues I had with my brother, their kids didn't deserve to lose their school, that she knew I was a good person, that she knew I loved my nieces and nephews, that she was sure we could work something out. I let her finish. Then I asked her a question. Did she know how the private school was being paid? Silence. Did she know that for the past 2 years, I'd been covering 70% of the tuition because my brother kept missing payments. Did she know that he'd told her his business was doing better than it was? That the credit cards in my name were maxed out on business expenses for a company that hadn't turned a profit in 3 years? The silence stretched so long I thought she'd hung up. Then, quietly, no. I told her I wasn't trying to hurt the kids, but I was done enabling their father. The school had payment plans, the school had financial aid. The school had options that didn't involve me bankrupting myself, because nobody else wanted to live within their means. She thanked me for my honesty. It hung up. Wednesday, my sister's car came up in conversation with my mother. She'd been forced to set up a payment plan with the impound lot. She couldn't afford to get the car out. She called me horrible things, but now she needed the title transferred to her name anyway, so she could sell it. She wanted to know if I'd sign off on it. I told my mother I'd already started the title transfer. My sister would have the paperwork within 2 weeks. The loan, however, was still in my name, because you can't transfer a loan without refinancing, and her credit wouldn't support refinancing. She could either take over the payments through me, and I'd forward them to the bank, or she could let it default, and I'd report it to collections with her as the responsible party per the original agreement she'd signed. My mother asked what agreement. I sent her the photo of the document my sister had signed 3 years ago, stating she'd make the payments and maintain insurance. The document she'd conveniently forgotten about. The document she'd never honored. Thursday, I got an email from my father. First contact from him directly in 4 days. He wanted to meet for coffee. Just the two of us. Man to man. I agreed. Picked a place near my office. Saturday morning. Friday's dinner was cancelled. My mother called to say my brother refused to make his son apologize, that I was being unreasonable expecting a child to be held to adult standards, and that maybe we all needed more time to cool off. I told her that was fine. I had plans anyway. I didn't, but I went out anyway, treated myself to the birthday dinner I'd never gotten. Expensive steakhouse, bottle of wine, dessert. I sat alone at a table for one and enjoyed every bite. Saturday morning, my father was already at the coffee shop when I arrived. He looked older than I remembered, tired. He'd ordered black coffee and nothing else. I got my usual and sat across from him. He started with the house, the mortgage, the bank, the late fees stacking up. He wanted to know what I wanted. Money? An apology? What would it take for me to start making the payments again? I told him I didn't want anything. The house wasn't my responsibility. It never had been. I'd been doing him a favor. That favor had ended when my family made it clear my place in the family was as a wallet, not a person. He said I was being dramatic. I pulled out my phone, showed him the spreadsheet. Every payment, every amount. $206,000 over 5 years. 412 payments. Not once had he asked how I was doing. Not once had he asked if I could afford it. He just assumed. He stared at the numbers. Then he told me I made good money, that I didn't have kids or a wife, that I could afford it. I asked him if he thought that meant he was entitled to it. He didn't answer. I told him I'd been 27 when he asked me to co-sign. Fresh into a good job, trusting. He'd promised it was temporary, that he'd refinance me off within 2 years. He'd never even tried. He said refinancing was expensive. More expensive than losing the house? I asked. He changed tactics, brought up family, obligation, how he'd raised me, fed me, put a roof over my head. This was how I repaid him? I told him he'd done the legal minimum required of a parent, and was now trying to collect interest on it. That wasn't how family worked. That was indentured servitude. He called me selfish. I stood up, told him the mortgage was due on the 15th. He had 3 weeks to figure out his options. Refinance, sell, find a roommate, get a second job. Any of the things he'd expect me to do if I was struggling. Then I left. He didn't follow me. By Sunday, the family group chat I'd been removed from had apparently devolved into chaos. My mother called to tell me my sister and brother were fighting. That my brother blamed my sister for setting this off with her text. That my sister blamed my brother's kid for spitting on the cake. That my father wasn't speaking to anyone. I asked her why she was telling me this. She said because I was family. Because we needed to fix this. I told her I didn't need to fix anything. I hadn't broken it. I just stopped holding it together with my checkbook. She cried, asked me what happened to me. When had I become so cold? I told her I'd learned from the best. The family that laughed while I was disrespected. The family that called me sensitive for having boundaries. I hadn't become cold. I just stopped being warm enough to burn myself for their comfort.